Is this? Okay, hi, my name is Fatu, and I have a question for you guys. As women of color, how do you guys deal with invalidation, in the workplace and like expressing your views, and how to like get people to listen with what you have to say without, becoming, the angry girl?
I am angry all the time. I'm angry, I'm joyful, I have a diverse range of emotions, and I'm not intimidated by, I don't know if this is where, I'm just gonna talk real loud. I'm just not intimidated by what other people think about me, and I just don't care. And I don't get, it doesn't change my own life. Like, the way that you perceive me has very little to do with what I'm saying to you. And I have learned over the years to deal with people microaggressing me and being like, why do you feel like I'm angry? What am I saying that makes you kind of feel that way? And can we get to the root of what that is versus what you're trying to label me as? And I'm like, really, I've been, this is kind of like not so good, right? But like, I'm very clear to tell people, like, if I don't feel really good in this space, I won't stay in this space. I have like really clear boundaries. I'm like really clear on calling people out, like, hey, that was real racist. Can we go back on that? Like, can we talk about what this is rooted in? Or hey, that was real sexist. You're only saying this because I'm a woman. And a lot of that puts you in jeopardy, right? So it becomes a question of like, are you going to live in your values, or are you going to live in other people's values? And for me, because I work in money and I give away money, I have to live in my values every single day at every single space. Because the moment I stop living in my values, the moment I stop speaking my truth, is the moment I become like a dirty money modeler. And I literally become the people that like my parents have no idea, they don't understand what I do. They just think I like am just some crazy person that like gives money away to like bad people, right? But like the moment I start to gray the lines is the moment that I start to compromise myself. And it becomes a question, right, of like, are you finding yourself in spaces where you're being supported? And when you aren't, do you have the ability to leave? Can you renegotiate those spaces in a way that allows you to kind of be able to speak up? And I'm a really big advocate of we don't have to stay in spaces where folks don't want us, because our table is longer than theirs. Our voices are powerful. Folks in our community love us. Folks in our community will uplift us, and there are spaces for us everywhere. And we don't have to stay where we're not wanted, because those spaces will die out.
Just let me know.
I really wanted to talk to this because where I work now, I work in a policy analysis firm, and I literally was the second person of color in general to be at that firm. And oftentimes I was in a room, I'd be in a room, I'd either be the only person of color, the only woman, or both. And it was very, very challenging to just like find myself in that space time and time again. And I kind of found myself feeling kind of I don't know if you guys heard of like imposter syndrome, where you feel like, where you internalize the feeling that you don't belong in a space, and that you start thinking of yourself as lesser than. And it took me a long time to kind of push that off and feel like I do belong here. This is my job. You don't tell me what to do because I am above you. Like it takes like it takes a lot of time to learn that you are exactly where you're supposed to be. And you're there for a reason. You are in that space for a reason. You were either hired or chosen for that position for a reason, and you just can't doubt yourself. You have to be very firm and strong with who you are and know what you're doing, and know that your skin color should not matter. So like I've come to a point where I don't even think of myself as being different in my firm. Even if people look at me differently and people interact with me differently, it took over a year for them to be comfortable with me being in the same space as them, and just having to live in that and still kind of persevere and still be one of the highest performing people in my firm. I've come so far, and it's like, if you do that, you're going to be one of the strongest people ever in the world.
Yeah, no, great question. So say that, like, I was working in a workplace where I knew my supervisor, he expressed these opinions out loud. But he believed that young women of color do not assert themselves in the workplace. We tend to come into this workplace without branding ourselves, right? And he had this whole idea and stereotypes in his head about what young women of color do, right, in a professional workplace. That was really hard for me to deal with, right? Especially with that power dynamic, right, with someone who was a manager. And I made sure, after hearing that every time I felt that he was asserting some sort of stereotype onto me, whether it be, for example, Asian American women are quiet, right? You don't see a lot of Asian American women in politics. We don't speak up, right? I'm like, screw that, Like I had, this is my lived experience. I am going to speak about it. I'm going to call you out when I feel that you are addressing me or treating me in a way that is, blurred with this racial and gender stereotype going on in your head, right? And it made him uncomfortable. And so I made sure that I would, in a constructive way, and in a way that would not cause him to storm out of the room every single time, I would call him out in a way that inserted race and gender equity in the conversation, right? So I constantly used terms that made him uncomfortable, right? But making sure that it was asserted in the conversation and that it was being said in that space. And after a while, like this supervisor, he learned, I hope he learned, and people noticed, right? They spoke to him, right? He got, and he approached me one day and was like, I am so sorry, right? Like, and then we had a full-on conversation to, understand where I was coming from, and he listened. And that for me was a huge step in that workplace to address this situation that really made me have imposter syndrome all the time, but constantly having to, exhaust myself by training him and training others using the race and gender equity language.
The first step in making that happen.
You want to give us an example that we could play with? Like what kind of thing in your community would you like to see change?
I don't know, like education policy or something. Yeah.
I think for me, the first step is always research. I mean, it might not be the most fun part of the process, but I think you really, to be able to speak on something and to be able to understand.
Takes up a large amount of time, and a lot of you guys are in school. So how did you manage to take time to do demonstrations and all everything, and still focus on school?
I'm gonna start, not because I'm still in school, I haven't been in school for a long time, but because my first big activist project was something that I started while I was in school. It was something that was an issue that was not related to the college that I was going to.
Hey, my name is Asvir. What I wanted to know was, as an activist, what was the hardest decision you ever had to make and why?
I need to get under you.
No, I only laugh because I think about this question pretty regularly. One of the hardest decisions that I make on a day-to-day is about putting my values first versus putting my donors' values first. It's really challenging because I also organize. I come out of Greek world organizing. I went to Spelman. I organize a lot around Black women's health and maternity rates. And oftentimes, what's most challenging is at a certain point, you don't get to be an activist anymore. You are an institution. So it's a good example of this is there was an amazing group in Atlanta that I worked for when I was in college at Spelman that I love, right? I love them so much. I think that they're so amazing. And they were on the brink of closing. And I wanted to give them funding. But I had 3 other groups that I also really loved. I had been organizing with them on the ground around separated children and families. One of them was working around DACA, and one of them was working around Haitian immigrant youth and getting them in.
Shai, could you speak into the mic?
Oh yeah. Oh sorry. Am I? Can you?
Now you're great.
Okay, cool.
Perfect.
So I had to make this decision about was I going to support this group that was really close and near and dear to my heart that I knew personally, but organizationally was a little sketch, or these other groups that I had also been organizing with as a professional, and that I thought was a little bit better. And what made that decision most hard for me was these were the people that I felt like I grew up with, that had known me for my entire life, that poured into me while I was at Spelman, gave me scholarships, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, I had to make a decision to support the group that I thought was best, not the group that I loved, that I knew, and that felt like family to me. And it's a decision that looking back on, I feel okay about, but I don't feel great, right? I have a hard time going back to them and being cool with them because at the end of the day, I'm an institution and I don't get to just be myself. And folks are like, yo, if you had given me this money, I wouldn't have to fire this person, I wouldn't have to do X, Y, and Z. But you kind of have to make those levels of choices about whether or not you're going to be an activist or whether or not you're going to move on and do something else.
I'm going to add one quick thing, which is I think a really difficult decision that a lot of activists get asked to make is how far they're willing to professionalize their activism. So there's a lot of freedom in just being an activist on the ground who does grassroots advocacy work, who can sort of, who can sort of move with where the community moves. A lot of the time those people end up getting job offers in the political realm or getting job offers on the policy side and are asked, to make the decision about whether it's more productive to go work in sort of halls of power where you are often asked to advance agendas that are not necessarily your own and are not necessarily agendas that you agree with in an effort to advance this one agenda that you agree with, or whether you would rather sort of stay in the community and work on the community side. I think that is something that people don't really talk about as a problem, because obviously getting job offers is a great thing and everyone wants a stable job, and certainly those of us that work on the nonprofit side don't often have the luxury of turning our noses up at stable public sector jobs. But you often are asked to sort of make a choice between whether you want to become part of the professional political class or whether you want to stay part of the activist class, and that can be a very tough decision to make as an activist.
I think that if there's